Passbolt is a free and open source password manager that allows your team to store, organize, and share passwords securely. Passbolt is privacy first and highly versatile. It can be installed on-prem behind your firewall, used in a secure cloud, or deployed as a cloud-native application. You can check out the source code on GitHub, extend it with the REST API, integrate it with the CLI or SDKs, and even contribute. Get started with Passbolt for free now. Check it out at securityweekly.com/Passbolt. UFOs are everywhere. That's right. UFOs, unidentified file objects, are hiding in files in your cloud apps and storage. UFOs can contain malware that exfiltrates data or deploys ransomware. 70% of UFOs in files can't be detected or prevented by traditional scanning solutions like antivirus and sandboxing. That's where Vatiro comes in. Vatiro prevents UFOs before they hitch a ride in on files in the cloud, without detection and without slowing down business. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Vatiro. That's VOTIRO. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Marud Hamaran Gunashekaran about the importance of adapting to development teams when teaching secure coding. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. Because we don't have any announcements, we're going to start off our news segment, John, with a topic that you have been thinking about for a little bit and calling out questions or gathering questions from our listeners. So one of the things I wanted to start with, a segment that we're going to, at least for now, call it the AP I Don't Know question and answer segment. And we're going to kick it off with a question that starts off with, for 2023, my boss wants us to take security more seriously. And I decided that decided that I will be our new application security person. It seems like there's so much to do. Very true. Can you suggest 3 things to get started with? So, John, what are your 3 things to help out this answer?
So, I first, hey, we're starting recording. I'm already coughing. First, I think, well, we heard this from one person. I think this is something we're going to see from a lot of people are thinking about, right? New year. New projects. Let's be honest, we're in tech. Well, the big tech guys, at least, they've started downsizing. So like there's less people doing more. Hey, you tag, you're now AppSec. And welcome to Application Security, our new listener. But okay, so what do you do with that, right? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on this, Mike. And we missed Akira. She had some stuff. We'll try and weave some of her thoughts in here as we go along. But for me, I brought it down to 3 things. First one was scan. And when I first started thinking about this, I'm like, one of the lines in my notes is like, I don't care how you scan. I don't care what you scan. Just scan. Get something to start with, right? Start understanding what is this thing you've just had thrown at you. Asset scan. Figure out, what the line which all the vendors say is, you can't secure what you don't know. But then I'm like, hey, we're on an AppSec show, so let's sort of bring this back a little tighter. Let's think about doing maybe either it's funny, I wrote down service scanning, which we think of as application scanning, but nowadays everything is sort of exposed through a load balancer, so it's a service, right? But where I'm coming from this is take we've just talked about Zap in the last half hour. Take one of the application scanners out there with the dynamic scanners against maybe your development. Could even do the scan on your laptop, right, on a weekend on your application if you're in a state where you can run your application on your dev application on your laptop. But scan and just sort of see what's exposed. And why I'm saying this is, and I know this is a long conversation for 3 simple points, right? But to talk through it, I want you to scan your thing from public, or hell, don't tell anyone I told you this, but go and point your scanner at your production site and see what happens, because the hackers are doing it anyways. But scan your thing and sort of see what's exposed, right? And what I'm coming at from here brings us into point 2 is start reading. And I don't want you to go and listen to every episode of Application Security Weekly, all 200 something. I don't want you to go and read all the AppSec books out there. I want you to go, okay, my scanner showed me these 10 things, which it marked super red, critical. Now, for each one of those, sort of understand what's going on. And you'll probably sort of prairie dog through and from one, foxhole through, and from one sort of click down to another and another. But make your learning focused. Start getting a sense for what does this mean? What did this application scanner find? Is it accurate? What's going on? But then the third point I think is most interesting. I think this will be a bit of a curveball, because point 3 is I want you to go back to either your IT team or your security team and say, hey, my name's John. I'm going to be doing application security stuff this year in my group. I'm not here asking you for anything. I'm just letting you know this is a new interest of mine. It's something you'll be working on. Might have some questions in the future. Is this something you guys have you been thinking about this already? Have you maybe done a scan? Is there something I should be aware of as I sort of start diving into this? Was there someone working here 3 years ago who was really eager about this, and for some reason he moved on, or the role moved on, or whatever happened, and that got left? Are you aware of something, or am I starting from scratch? Or so, sort of an introductory conversation. And that's my 3, and that's sort of interesting, right? Because I didn't say a single thing about fixing any of this stuff. I think there's a lot of things that you got to do from my point of view just to start getting going in it. But that's my 3. Mike, I'm curious to hear yours.
I like that. And we don't coordinate. We coordinate on what the question is, but not the answer. So my answer similarly actually starts with a scanning tool, but I was going specifically for software composition analysis, something like Dependabot. And the reason more so is, again, I'm going to crib from your answer and say not so much about fixing, but use an SCA tool like Dependabot because it starts a security-related process with developers, meaning it gets the developers used to seeing here's input or here's some input from a security tool that will eventually have to be fixed. And it starts to say, well, how do we fix it? When do we fix it? What are the expectations? The second one would be use a secrets manager, or implement a secrets manager both within your CI/CD pipeline and your production environment. Could be something as simple as AWS Secrets Manager, for example. But the reason I'm focusing on that is that's some security related engineering that you're discussing with developers. Here's some code that developers are going to implement that protects secrets. It's a security aspect of it. And the third thing will be review the OWASP SAM. Basically, don't try to fix everything all at once. Look at the SAM and use it to plan out some goals or some ideas what you'd like to mature the program to be over a timeline of something like 3 years, which I think ties in very well with what you were saying is also you're going to have this plan for maybe think of a 3-year plan where you want to mature, but you're going to have to talk to some people. So I think there's definitely some overlap and in how we approach this. And Akira also, one of the things that she was thinking about was the OAuth SAM as well. It's a good reference. And I think none of what we focused on was fix all your vulns or fix all the vulns within 30 days or something like that. So listeners, very curious if this resonates with you, or if what would your answers be for this, as well as give us more questions because we'd love to answer those.
Yeah, and so sort of bring it back a little bit what she was saying, and sort of what you were saying there too, which is also with something we had in our last half hour with Maru Damaran, which is set some goals, which I didn't, and I was thinking about this during the last half conversation. I specifically didn't go there because I want you to sort of, I'm thinking of someone super green and like dip the toe in the water, start understanding, as that toe feels the water wet, the waves going out, right? It's a pretty big ocean. And as you get a sense, I think steps, I don't know, maybe next week we'll do steps 4, 5, 6. But as we sort of we have one question for the rest of the year, step 49.
Exactly.
But as you go through this process, then you start thinking about, okay, now I've seen these things. Okay, now how do I deal with it? And that's when I start thinking, okay, you need to segment it, create the Jira tickets and then sort of go through and set the goals over the year. But I think it's important I think probably the first question we should have asked on this in response to this question is, what type of person are you? Are you looking for quick results to show the boss man, boss woman, boss person? Or are you more meticulous? You want to plan out what the next 6 months is going to be and what those steps 45 are? And so I think that probably partially comes back to either of our answers, hopefully, are useful to you. But I think that's something to think about, too. How do you approach this type of thing?
Now, that's a great point. And one of the phrase that was used in there is we want to take security seriously because that is the common phrase in breaches, which in the news, we've got 2, one from T-Mobile, one from PayPal. And I included them just as a real quick commentary is that T-Mobile, it's an API breach, but that's like saying software is eating the world. It's just a general statement that doesn't help us learn anything about it. So hopefully we can get some more details about a breach in the manner of Circle CI. They had a recent postmortem that was very good. Details, what happened, what users should do. And with the PayPal breach, similarly, that looked like it was based on credential stuffing. So again, difficult potentially to build up a good application defense in terms of secure coding. There's more of secure processes or making sure there's a multi-factor authentication for the user. So just highlighting those as some just quick examples of where those discussions hopefully can bring us to in terms of an architecture or security decisions. Not sure if there's anything else you'd want to add there, if we should move on to a bunch of different, more interesting stories.
So really briefly on the TMO one, ignoring the negatives, if I remember right when I saw this, if I can scan this real quickly, if I remember right, there's not a lot of information being disclosed. I thought, wasn't this one last for on socials? There was one of the, where I'm going with this, one of the breaches over the last week or so was a breach, but it was partial. What was being disclosed was like name, address, last four, which I mean, you can't get that on Google, but we're pretty close to that right now. Maybe you can ask.
Yes.
Maybe I can. Someone go quickly type into a chat GPT, what are the last four digits on Mike Shima's social security number? See what comes up. That is sort of fun, actually. But
1337.
where I'm going with this is from an AppSec point of view, right? It's okay. That's still not great. We're still being exposed. But as we make more attempts to either use those password safes or stores, as Mike was just saying, or doing a little more masking, try to. Any effort you can put into like minimizing the exposure of this data. It's not just on the firewall or the WAF or whatever's going on out front or how you encrypt it, but like maybe you can't encrypt it, maybe it's too expensive, or your bosses want to develop everything. But what can you do, right? It's a bit of that sort of Jeet Kune Do of like from Bruce Lee of like, okay, I can't do a direct attack, but can I sidestep and sort of do a little bit of an improvement? So that's my takeaway on this one.
Yeah, and especially with the T-Mobile's 37 million records. Mm-hmm. And there, the questions that come to my mind are, was there any rate limiting in place here? Or was there any alerting on, there's one account or one IP address even that's making these repeated types of requests? Or was it a distributed type of attack that's pulling out this information? So there's a lot of follow-up questions I would have, which is why I would love to see more of a details about a breach notification, because that can tell us, well, actually rate limiting would have helped in this case, or for that matter, it wouldn't have helped, or there should have been alerting in addition to what you were pointing about just how do we better protect it? Do we have to display this type of information from our API? Which I'm going to take as a quick segue into some Orca research. So Orca and Wiz are kicking off 2023 with picking apart all the cloud service providers. This month, or this week at least, we're looking at Orca, who found some SSRF in 4 different services in Azure. One of which I had to go figure out what the heck it was. Azure Digital Twins, which I think wins the AWS award for inscrutable naming of a service. It's basically a way to create use IoT spatial intelligence to create models of physical environments. Basically, you're creating virtual models of items, so you can rotate, do some manufacturing. Is more in that space.
It's really an industrial thing, which is probably why you haven't heard of it. I've barely heard it from a previous gig. For folks out there who have a little bit of free time in your hand, go look at what GE is doing with digital twins. They literally model the jet engine as a digital twin so they can test things out. It's super cool. But the Azure service is sort of a more basic version of that. But one of these, Mike, I can't remember which, I saw it last week. Part of the SSRF was the use of emoji. So it came down to how they were being filtered. And I haven't read this particular article on this. But again, it's we like these articles that sort of not just say what's going on, but actually dig into how did we get there, and bring this back to our the question we had at the top of the hour, half hour of top of the news. How about that? Stop talking, John. Bring it back to the concept of like, how do I get started in this? Well, read an article like this, look at how they went sort of poking around making things, and sort of bring that back into your own environment.
Yeah, great point. And some aspects of this that I want to talk about were also, on the one hand, there's some good things here. All of the cloud service providers, I think it's safe to say, have good protections in place in terms of protecting their in Azure, the IMDS, the metadata services, as well as IMDb. Nope, that's the movie one. Whatever it is, the metadata services, they're protecting, moving identity tokens to headers, which are more difficult to exploit with SSRF. So there's good aspects there. But a question more is just, what are the design considerations that lead to SSRF in the first place? Do we as the application need to be passing around arbitrary URLs, or there are other designs that can improve this. So kind of just an open-ended rhetorical question there. And in the sense of learning, like you were pointing out, Burp Collaborator is a great tool for looking at blind SSRF. There's a lot of times that SSRF or XSS for that matter might be triggered, but you need an out-of-band way of monitoring it, meaning does it generate a DNS query, or can it hit an internal resource, obviously, or can you make it point to an external resource? And something like Burp Collaborator helps with this. There's other tools called Pingbin and Interact Shell, Interact SH. And so just wanted to mention those as well, as these are types of articles read, learn techniques, and build up your tool set. Want to switch and get started? We have for whatever reason, a lot of articles this week about some programming languages. I'm going to start with a very simple focused area about problems with integers. This is a blog post from Julia Evans, and I wanted to highlight this for a couple of reasons. One, it goes through 9 different examples that talk about security-related issues with integers that are more than just an integer overflow or an integer underflow. So it's really good to think about, oh, right, there's other things that we need to worry about with numbers, as well as she has a wonderful debugging guides, the zines. And we've mentioned the zines once or twice last year, I think. And the guide to debugging is one that is paid for, but is a great resource to check out. So definitely take a look at this list of integers. Check out the guide to debugging. But on these integers, there's also a history of, there's an advisory from Git that actually had this year or this month that had an integer overflow related to how it's handling the .git attributes file. And there's an old school library for C++ called safeint that came out of Microsoft that is basically a safe way to handle integer overflows. The reason I mentioned that, it's nearly 7,300 lines of code for safely handling integer overflows, which doesn't sound like the best situation for us to be in. And
that's amazing.
Let's see if John will let you recover from that little bit of data and see what you think.
What I was thinking, I'm not trying to tie 2 segments here or 2 stories together, but I sort of am, or I'm going to. And I went looking through Julia's list, and they're almost all C. 1 is Go so far. I think most of them are. Well, that one looks Go, so 2 are Go. Oops. My story's falling apart. But we treat. I think we here on the Security Weeklies know that. The level of security we happen to believe, our level of look at either type safety, well, not type safety, level of let's focus on integers and make these connected. There's a lot of ways you can shoot yourself in the foot here, right? Obviously, we've seen a few in Go in here, but they're mostly C++. And I'm going to swing that over to another language article we had from Bjorn Storstrup. I think I can still pronounce it right. One of the people, or I believe the person who created C++, which some of us considered an extra ugly arm hanging off of the language C. But so, okay, I'm not going to talk too much about what he put out there. Well, we are, but what he put out there is a statement basically saying NSA has come out with the statement we said last year of they want to move the community towards type and memory safe languages. And our professor here came back with a strong statement of like C++ is safe if you enable A, B, and C. And basically is saying there's a standard which came out, the C++ core guideline, specifically aims at delivering statistically guaranteed type safe and resource safe C++ for people who need that without disrupting code bases. And apparently this is available in Microsoft Visual Studio Analyzer. Okay, so I thought. Again, I'm trying to keep focus here and not be John. I think it's good that he put this out there, and it's good for us to realize that, well, we talk a lot about, in particular Rust, but different languages and like the new languages being, much better. And we have had statements here in the last few weeks, examples of it's not always perfect. You can't just trust a new language. Tool's tool. So for folks who are using C++, there's light there for you if you need to use it. He made one good point in here of, how would I say, if you're in a very performance focused application, maybe you just want to turn off the safety features for some particular areas, and that's not as easy in other languages as it might be in C++. So I think that's valid. But I don't know. I'm going to stop there. Mike, thoughts, comments on this one? I don't know if you had a chance to read it yet.
I think, in my heart of hearts, I have a soft spot for C++. I spent 8 years writing it. And I would say that C++ can be secure if you look at at the time, C++ 11 extensions, then C++ 17, C++ 20, and even C++ 23. These are all maturing of the language that helps with better, smart pointers, better containers that can handle RAII in handling pointers. So there are ways to use it securely, but it does come into, you do have to still introduce that conversation about learning, about how much is your compiler going to help you. Clang and LLVM are wonderful for a bunch of different sanitizers and being able to point out common flaws and issues that can come up with C++. So again, I think if I were to try to be succinct, about this, it would be, I still fall very much in the camp of, I care less about your choice of language and more about your approach to development and your practices around it. And the reason for that, to expand a little bit, is that I've seen LLVM or seen IDEs being able to give better feedback about what you're writing, I think is great. And then well-written code that your peer developers can read and understand, I think is by nature going to be more secure, because they can say, oh, this is what this is supposed to be doing, or I'm understanding this. And if that is C++, good, but you're probably going to need a different type of developers than if you're just starting off with Go or starting off with Rust, for example. So that's going to be, I think, my approach to answer that question.
I'm not sure if this is a more succinct summary yet or not, but I think if you're programming professionally nowadays, you can't trust. I think I'd say the solution you're looking for here is not particularly a language, but is a stack of between the tools, CI, whatever you're using. Any one of those parts by itself is not good enough, but that overall stack of DevSecOps is what gets you where you want to be.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to work on that, because I think that was better said than I put it. And the reason I pulled in Rust as well, just one more quick comment on languages, is that this is from Google's blog talking about Rust and Chromium. And it's not so much pointing about Rust, but how they're thinking about it and why. So they're trying to get rid of IPCs. IPCs are a nice security barrier in the sense of being able to isolate memory issues, memory safety issues. So the IPC can be well crafted, well looked like. You're going to carry this blob of data over into this other process. The IPC is going to make sure that the buffers align nicely and so on. But it also carries an overhead, of course. So you're paying a tax, if you will, for that C++. And what they're looking to do as a sign of either part of their reasoning or a sign of success, they want it to speed up development, which they listed as number one. Second was security, but the speed of development would hopefully be less code to write, fewer design docs to have to review, and even less security review, because you're reducing the attack surface, or you have ostensibly fewer lines of code. So where I'm going to this mostly is that we can't just say throw away one language for another. Not going to happen anywhere. But if you can delete code, I think if you're removing code from your code base, reducing your attack surface, that's almost always a security win. Or if you can implement something in fewer lines of code, possibly a security win there. So that's the pitch I want to make for understanding why to go through those choices about languages.
I have to say there's a Elon Musk Twitter joke in there about removing services and code, but anyways.
Oh dear.
Yeah, sorry. Writers, just remember, listeners, just remember, Mike at securityweekly.com. That's where you send your complaints. No, this is a good bit. So take these 2-3 articles we have here and sort of, let's go this way. If you are a new developer, you're thinking about learning a new language, and you care about security, and you're listening to AppSec Weekly for that reason, where would you go? Would you start working with C++ in 2023, or Rust, or Go, or
yeah?
From my point of view, if that's your goal, if you're thinking about security, you're thinking about going down that path, and you see these large vendors, Microsoft's doing it, Amazon's doing it. Google's doing it. I know there's other vendors out there, but those three we talk about a lot. If they're putting as much resources into something like Rust, it's probably worth your looking at. Especially when you have these tools out, like they mentioned in this blog about being able to play nicely, quote unquote, with between the two languages. You don't have to move everything, right? Just move the little bits that you need to, the drivers, whatever else, and then over time, hopefully, you get to a better place. So that's the way I look at it.
Oh, great point. I think now it's time to look at the past and the future. So looking back at 2022, Portswigger and Group, the developers of Burp Proxy that we've mentioned several times, even on this very episode already, they've got the 10 web hacking techniques of 2022. They're just looking for, I think the nominations are over. They're collecting voting right now on to create a short list, and then on the January 26th, that short list they're going to put out for another round of voting, collect some 10 finalists. So listeners, go check that out. And some of the candidates I thought were pretty fun. There is one about desync, which once again is from Portswigger themselves. There's also some two or three others were the Dirty Dancing sign-in with OAuth flows. That was actually one that we covered a couple months ago. Also a great reference to Patrick Swayze movie. And there was a story of leaking uninitialized memory from Fastly. I liked that one in particular because it's a deep dive into a protocol, Quick for that matter, or the precursor, what HTTP3 is now, and how the protocol is implemented. So always a great way of just to learn things to review. And there was one, the till recollapse. It was about fuzzing and regular expressions, which were just two of my favorite tastes that go great together. So those were some of the areas that I would be voting on and looking forward to seeing what will come out for 2022. John, I'm not sure if you've been looking through this list or if you have a favorite technique that you'd love to see.
You posted this summer last week. It might have been on LinkedIn, and I started looking at it then. And for our listeners who haven't seen this yet, there's, I think, around 45 items in this list. So it's a lot of reading just to be able to pick out the top 10. My favorite so far is the GUID one. That just talked about, a GUID's not a GUID, even though it sounds like a standard. There's multiple different. I tend to be tickled by any of these type of things where we have a standard, and it turns out there's a standard of, a bunch of different substandards. But yeah, there's a lot of good reading in this list. There was another one in here around electron-based apps. I thought was pretty cool. Those are becoming more and more standard for desktops. So that gives you a ability to reuse your skills if you build them for that, I will say, from the security point of view. But yeah, I'm curious to see what this gets whittled down to for the final 10 or the final group that gets voted on.
Yes, so we'll see those. February 7th is when Portswigger and folks will be publishing their top 10 list, and we will cover that on the very next episode to follow. So please go vote, and or let us know as well what your favorites are, because we can also highlight those. So that was, John, a look back at 2022. Another thing, perhaps also a look back, but also maybe a look forward, is a Google Cybersecurity Action Team Threat Horizons Report number 5. Is out. And man, I almost got that through in a single breath, but you can't read it in a single breath because it's a bit long. But this came across your radar. You thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So the title's long enough. I didn't get to the paper. I think I looked at it. If I remember right, it was 26 pages or so of recommendations. But Anton Javakin over in the I think he's in CISO group or the CTO group, one or two at Google Cloud, summarizes down into a few more basic points, which works with my simple brain. And it's interesting. It's sort of looking at really focused around cloud stuff. Majority of the issues they saw in the last year were weaker no credentials, followed, a second place API compromise, misconfiguration, software issue, then misconfiguration, then leaked credentials. And looking at that, as I say, I put leaked credentials together with weaker no credentials, so that's the majority of issues. Software issue, and this was actually done by Mandiant, which is now part of Google, right? And I'd focus down from this particular podcast on the software issues, which are usually going to be either updates or just weaknesses in the software, which is why you need updates. So, there's a lot of stuff going on out there. There's a lot of good stuff in this report. Hopefully some of our listeners get to pick one of these lengthy things we talk about each week and just dive into them, because we've got at least one more. But yeah, it lets you think about what happened, what do you need to focus on, as you said, and what's coming up for 23, and how to hopefully whack that particular mole.
Yes, the mole that I found crawling around through there was backups increasingly targeted by threat actors. So that was the one line takeaway that I will share, and it also points to the LastPass breach, because that was as from their write up, which was in terms of disclosures was eventually a pretty decent write up. So only maybe a moderate amount of shade. I think that's will be on. I'm trying to adapt a Kinsella scale to the amount of shade we throw on disclosures here. But it was basically a production backup that was accessible through a development environment. So they were crossing the streams there, and obviously bad things happened. Another aspect of secrets, and this was coincidentally not the reason I mentioned Secrets Manager in my answer to the AP I don't know segment, but somebody went out and scanned all of Pipi, and they found a couple AWS keys, John.
Yes.
What happened?
Including keys from Amazon themselves. Yeah, so this particular individual, Tom, don't know much about him. He might be somebody, so if he is, my apologies. Everybody is somebody, excuse me. He decided to do exactly what we said and ripped through everything on Pipi, the Python module repository. I think it took him 27 hours to download all the stuff on his home internet connection. So I don't know if he's bandwidth limited on that or what his build's going to be like. But so he went ripping through everything looking for secret keys. That part's pretty easy. Found 57 of them. I mean, we're not talking. So in my mind, it's one thing to have those in your. It's one bad thing to have those in your GitHub repo publicly. If you've actually gone and packaged up your software as a module and that ends up on a repository, folks, you're not packaging up your code right. You should be deploying stuff which just goes into production. That's what that part's supposed to be. But so everyone's going to focus on the Amazon one, or a lot of people are. So let's go look at it. They've got a link in here to the code, if I remember right. And it's. I don't have it in front of me right now because I can't read and talk. I can't do anything these days. But what the particular bit of code was they had credentials and then they commented them out, and then they had another set of credentials, and it was a example code for one of the Amazon APIs. I don't think it was AWS. I think it was Amazon itself. We've talked about this a lot. Stop saving your credentials, damn it. There's multiple ways. Again, as you were saying, use a store, use something. Real quick, one of the things we've talked about over the last... No, it's actually in this. One of the people that they talked about, was it Amazon? God, I hope not. One of the people they talked about in here, after being flagged on using credentials, they then turned around and they still didn't fix it right. And it seemed like it was sort of, they were dragging their feet. They decided, we're going to put them as environment variables, not as hard-coded in the code. And it's like, no, you're still, that doesn't... Go and spend 5 minutes in OWASP, figure out how to store this stuff correctly, and use like secret management. But anyways, I'll get off that soapbox.
No, it's still a good soapbox because obviously the problems are still coming up. One of the things that also mentions near the end of that article is that Python is often used in a lot of data science, which ties into ML and even potentially some AI, which I'm going to use as a segue for two other articles real quick. One from NCC Group that was using machine learning to cluster web pages that was kind of intriguing to me and interesting because there's maybe some potential there to identify through machine learning workflows within a web application. They're basically decomposing the visual structure, if you will, or the front end, the user-facing structure of a web page to figure out this form or these fields are related to this form, which my words is related to this particular workflow. These fields or this form is this other workflow. And the reason I'm focusing on workflows is that if you're doing automated scanning, especially through DAST, you need to exercise what the end user does to put the application into a state so that you can then figure out, here is a flaw. Here is how we do more interesting fuzzing. So fuzzing quite often needs to get an application into an interesting state before then you can find those flaws. So not sure, don't know what I'll say it's interesting. Maybe it looks like promise, but I don't know what the success is there or how it's being used yet with some fuzzing. And I'm going to tie that real quick, John, and then to LLM's article from Mike Zalewski, who is a very well-known name within web application hacking and InfoSec in general, who hasn't done a lot of writing recently on InfoSec topics. But the reason I highlighted this, it was talking about LLMs, large language models. How much do we need to worry about them? And his premise was focusing on basically just a lot of bots talking to each other. And so we're going to have to update the classic New Yorker cartoon. On the internet, no one knows if you're a dog bot or something like that. No one knows if you're a chat GPT. And this was just for me a chance to say, in the InfoSec world, if we're talking about LLMs and, it's going to make malware more dangerous, or it's going to make phishing more dangerous, I think we've lost the focus of that conversation, that if we're worried about malware, we should be looking not at signatures and what clever ways ChatGPT can create malware. We should be looking at behaviors, having controls to find it. If we're talking about phishing, especially credential-oriented phishing, we should be talking about WebAuthn. We should be talking about better authentication controls, not worrying about don't click on this link or not. So that was what I wanted to highlight there. Let me throw it over to you, John.
I'm going to, talk about myself for a moment in a negative way. It doesn't happen a lot, but I'm sure I've said stupid crap on this show, which means that stupid crap is now out on the internet. And these LLMs might not be scanning yet because they're not scanning podcasts, but sometime they're going to take the stupid crap John has said and start recommending it and auto-completing it to somebody out there. Congratulations, listeners. And why I say that, I think there's a lot of good coming out of these things. And I think the end goal is we're going to get to a really great place. And I've had discussions with Keith Hoodlet on this stuff on LinkedIn in the past of like, what's the actual value we're getting out of GitHub Copilot that's in VS Code or can be in VS Code? And for me, when I play with that, okay, it was neat. It was sort of a bit of a toy. Sometimes it did some neat stuff. Sometimes it like just sort of gave me junk. And I know GitHub has, in particular, they've done studies showing the amount of improvement, basically trying to justify the cost of the software. And I'm not bashing against anyone, but this is just an example. I know there's lots of different ways this can be used and it's out there, but this comes to mind. My point is, I think it's neat. It's a fun toy. I wouldn't, definitely wouldn't bet my life on it. I wouldn't bet a lot on it, right? I mean, hell, if any of us who've taken like machine learning classes, there's usually some sort of program in there like, here's the data set from one of the universities back east on like, chances of recognizing what's a tumor and then doing the image recognition on that like stupid little blob, which is like, that type of data like is like miles away from like what comes out of any modern health machine, which is a lot more complicated to deal with. So the basic examples are great and fine and cool. Okay, someone's trying to write malware with this. Did they do it seriously or did they do it as a joke? Funny, haha. I'm guessing it's the latter. From a realistic point of view, to bring it back, I saw something in the media, in one of the stories in the last few days. One of the security vendors out there is starting to offer, they're building ChatGPT into their tool. So when it finds a vulnerability, it'll then ask ChatGPT to show how to remediate it. The first words that come to my mind are DigitalOcean, and people who remember that back when they were doing their SEO tricks, there was a lot of bad information on DigitalOcean. So I don't know, a long-winded way of saying neat toy, not too concerned yet.
Neat toy, not too concerned yet. And in the interest of disclosure, I've possibly said one or two things that might have not have been 100% accurate. So when ChatGPT is pointing the transcripts from Application Security Weekly, it's going to get a love of horror movies, which is good, but maybe a couple things that are not quite right that will need some human oversight to fix.
Maybe we can start that as the new curse for when the AIs are incorrect in their recommendations in the future. Damn it, John, or damn it, Mike.
There we go. Or we'll intentionally add an incorrect recommendation to our show just to keep the ChatGPTs from taking over. With that, I did want to mention a tool this week. One of the things we've been trying to do are highlight different tools. This one comes a little bit out of a curveball. I think that was mentioned as well. Explainshell.com, which I think is really cool. And this is focused more on, especially focused, I think, for those of you who have never played with a Unix-like command line, Linux or Mac OS. and are like, wait, what's up with all these semicolons and tars and cuts and, cats and whatnot? And what this does is it takes a bash command, builds an AST of it, takes that AST and says, here is the paragraph that describes what this particular command line does. Here's what this particular argument does. And it breaks it down into a wonderful way of explaining what a shell command does. And I thought that was a really fun use that hopefully is the type of thing that we see grow into explaining what software does. Here is a function, here is arguments, and these are ways of, in this case, it's not using ML or ChatGPT, but this potentially is where those areas could move into just to describe what's going on with this particular code. So explain shell, a very fun way to understand what is going on when you're doing a lot of these. Type this into your command line recommendations as you're walking through install scripts or you're reading about particular tools. So thought it was pretty fun. That's my highlight of the week.
Sorry, I'm stuck playing with this now. I'm going to, I went back to, so I don't have a tool. I have been hands off the last 2 weeks. I need to get my hands dirty again. But what I did just do right now is I've had this tab for that tool sitting here for the last half hour as we've been talking. I just pasted one of my old commands and went back to my notes, found a command, git diff -- name -- status develop / internal, pipe it through egrep, pipe it through awk, pipe it through xargs, pipe it through xargs again. And the output is sort of crazy. So we'll put the command into our Discord so people can go and play with that and actually figure out. I don't think this doesn't look like a command I wrote. I think I got this from somewhere else. I usually don't use xargs, but that looks like sort of fun. So good find.
Yeah, drop that, and we'll drop that command into explain shell, and that way somebody could figure out, reverse engineer what exactly that shell, that Git command was doing. Speaking of Git commands, we'll be developing a new segment around Git. Possibly, but we'll leave that as the teaser, but and say no more. But please do send us more questions. We would love to answer them. And I will have to also say we're out of time. So John, thank you very much for this week. Akira, we missed you. We'll hopefully have you with us next week. Listeners, thank you for joining us. Please do subscribe, hit that like button, check out the show notes. And speaking of starting a new year, check out Sunrise Stance by Dana Jean Phoenix and Power Nerd. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.